Hey everybody, welcome to Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen King, where we discuss what's missing in Web3 architecture.
So this week we're talking about the Ethereum Name Service.
For feedback, please go to missinglinks.fm, send us an email, give us some feedback on what we discuss and what you'd like us to cover next week. All right, let's get into it.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Missing Links, where we discuss the missing infrastructure in Web3 with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen. How you guys doing today?
Good.
Doing great.
Yeehaw. All right, so this week we're talking about the Ethereum Name Service. So ENS, sort of like DNS, but for the Ethereum blockchain. And let's just kick it off with what is ENS? John, why don't you start things, please?
Awesome. So ENS, you can think of it as almost like a DNS, your domain name server service. Just like if you go www.com, Google, or whatever website you want to go to, it resolves to some type of IP or some type of server, and that's how you get your content delivered to you. For the ENS, it is similar in concept, but it's primarily for the decentralized world. So it can translate into either an address, a wallet, or even a collection of smart contracts. And you can have, contracts that can actually resolve it to different things. So the best way to think about it is if you're a business, let's just call it John's Cookies, and you want to take payment of some type to a smart contract, it's easier to say johnscookies.eth because it will resolve to all the appropriate addresses needed to do the transaction, but your customers don't have to know it. So it gives a more smooth interaction.
So in other words, instead of like 0x and a bunch of letters after that, it's you can go to johnscookies.eth instead of that long hash.
Exactly.
Yep, I like that. That's exactly what DNS did. Brock, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that pretty well covered it. There's one interesting thing I saw in the ENS FAQ where they it's worth noting there's other protocols kind of like ENS out there, like Handshake, and ENS claims to separate themselves from those, and that ENS is not trying to replace DNS; it wants to work in tandem. Whereas protocols like Handshake are trying to replace DNS altogether. So it's, I don't know, interesting tidbit.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you guys about that because the one that I heard about was called not name server. Oh man, I'll think of it. But yeah, these guys are taking a more decentralized approach. I think it's pretty cool what they've been doing. Nick Johnson and Alex Desan, I don't know how to say his last name, but have been around the space for a while, and they've done a fantastic job putting this together. Okay, so Ethereum Name Service, basically sort of like a DNS system for the Ethereum blockchain. Cool. It's an NFT, so Brock loves it. So Brock, they released a token. Do you know anything about this token? I know it was airdropped, but what is the purpose of this token?
So ENS was around before NFTs were defined. But as they've openly admitted, they were always not quite the original, but they were always meant to be an NFT. So it fits really nicely. And so part of kind of that transitionary period from the old ENS system to now the NFT based one, they also migrated to a DAO structure, so a decentralized autonomous organization. And so part of that was anybody who held ENS names prior to that migration was airdropped these governance tokens. So as a holder of those tokens, you can help vote on the direction of ENS going forward.
I was going to say, doing the DAO, it allows those people to have future say after. The idea is that eventually the people who run the project will, I don't want to say dissolve, but eventually it'll be the community that decides the decisions of that network or of those components within the network. So, it's very cool. And it will come down to, I don't think they're called charters. They're called EIPs or ESPs, like namespace, almost like EIPs, which are Ethereum improvable proposals, but pretty much people can vote on what they want the future of the network to look like.
Cool. Just quickly, do you guys participate in any DAOs?
I did. Oh, I did. I did a long time ago, but that's the thing. The DAO, being in a DAO is almost, you gotta also consider it a full loss, because if there's no participation, or it gets boring, people are not going to do it. It becomes a duty for it to be viable.
It's more fun when you own a lot of the token, because then you can vote and it actually matters. But if you only own a little bit, then there's not really the incentive. Okay, so one thing I want to break down.
It's a little tricky.
Yeah, agreed. John, why don't you do you know enough about the infrastructure in terms of how the smart contracts operate, interact with each other? Because I went down a deep rabbit hole because I wanted to understand how this is going to work on the L2s, like Optimism, how this communication is going to take place between layer 1 and layer 2. I'm sure you both have thoughts on this, but John, do you have any initial ones?
So I know I've gone through their smart contract collection. I'm actually looking at it right now. The inner workings themselves, I am not that privy to, though I know it's one of the questions I have about it is just how it's going to scale in regards to the state chain, because that's how that's how it's finding the data it needs to resolve to what it needs, because you're storing information. Like, think of the DNS or any type of name like key pairs. You're storing pretty much combinations of this goes to this. So how do you manage that at scale, since it's decentralized? So I have more of a data question versus a operational question, but we can get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, I've dug into the contracts some, specifically from the data standpoint, because I've like indexed all of ENS just for the hell of it. And it's a suite of contracts. There are interesting nuances in there. Like, you can go from a name, so johnstrickies.eth, you can convert that off chain to a token ID, so the NFT, or you can convert it to a node, which is like this hexadecimal fixed length string that is the actual representation of the name. But you can't necessarily go the other way. So like, if you have the token ID, you can't figure out the node unless you like do some weird cross-referencing. So there's some weird nuances there. Long story short, it's a whole bunch of contracts on Ethereum all working together. You have one where you like purchase and register the domain. You have another where you actually manage it. So if you want to add like a text record or an email address that's a totally separate
I would
contract.
even call it, it's an ecosystem onto its own, pretty much.
It's a big ecosystem.
Well, so this was actually a breakthrough for me when you indexed the ENS names and sent me that data. So I wrote a post on this called BDE something. John, you would appreciate that, because you seem to be you seem to know those kinds of musical artists. She may not be from Chicago. Her name's Queen Herbie or something. Anyway, so Brock sends me all this data.
Never heard of that.
You never heard? Google. I'll tell you after we get off the podcast. But anyway, so
I had never heard of it as BDE. Yeah,
Big D Energy. That it's like a hip hop song, I guess you could call it. Anyway, so Brock sends me all this data. I go to Etherscan all the time, right? There's tons of data there. You can decipher through it, and that's basically what I use to trade. But you have to use a couple of different resources to start to make sense of the data. Anyway, Brock, this is why we're building what we're building. He sends over this basically data as you're used to receiving data in like an Excel spreadsheet, and it makes sense. It's in English, and so it's really interesting because all this data, like the blockchain, all that information is public, and it's accessible to some extent, but to translate it is not that easy. And so I don't know. This is like been a big breakthrough. I mean, I think there was like 2 million ENS names that you pulled, and then we got 76,000 that entered one text field, meaning they filled out part of this form. And then of that, I think we got 50,000 emails.
Wow.
So yeah, can you go out and buy 50,000 emails? Yes, you can. But you can't publicly pull that from a database. And so I'm not sure that these people really understood what they were doing when they put in their emails. But the data aspect. Let's touch on that, John. You said you wanted to kick that off until later. Why don't you finish that thought?
Yeah. So with anything, I think this goes back to our original question of how things will scale in the future. But if you think about ENS trying, and I'm not saying it should try to be like DNS solely, but if people get into the pattern of using that within contract code, within daily operations, one hitch in that could have a very profound effect. Like, what if Google's DNS namespace got messed up? That would pretty be bad. That would be really bad. And like the fact that is kind of the start to any kind of network or any type of transaction. It needs to mature in the way that it needs to scale and solve the data problem, but it needs to do it responsibly, because one mistake could potentially have unprofound effects. And as we were talking about adoption and all these things, that's the one thing that kind of concerns me.
What do you mean by that? Like a reentrancy bug, or like just some kind of a bug in the code that will allow?
It's centralization in a decentralized world. Yeah. So there's always an inherent risk. Yeah.
Right. And if we wanted a truly decentralized world, ENS wouldn't exist. Because that becomes the point of failure. If it always has to resolve something, that becomes a point of failure.
The flip side to that, though, is in the world of ENS, you can run your own resolver.
That is a good point.
So you don't have to use the ones that ENS puts out, and you can still participate in the full network effect. So I think they've baked in and have thought through this in from a future looking standpoint. Yeah.
You guys have to break that down. I'm not as smart as you. So what do you mean? The resolver, you mean like ENS, the organization? They're resolving.
So it's
go ahead. Elaborate on that.
There's the ENS DAO, and so this is the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and they put out the primary ENS contracts, if you will. And so one of those is the ENS resolver, where you can take John's trickies.eth and you can ask the contract what address that's supposed to point to, and it'll tell you. And so the inherent potential security issue there is, well, you're going to a central source now to get that information resolved. So you're asking the ENS DAO's contract, what is John's trickies.eth supposed to resolve to? And so it's kind of a bit of a centralization, even though it's in a decentralized network. But one of the ways they've mitigated this is anybody can run their own resolver. So the contract code is open source. You can participate with all the other contracts, and you can write your own code to resolve these names without having to rely on ENS at all.
Are people doing that?
I don't know, to be honest.
I bet some hardcore people are, but I haven't seen it personally yet.
I bet Google would, if Google was going to take this seriously, right? Like you would imagine an organization.
Oh yeah,
sure,
100%.
It's funny because the whole point of this podcast is, we're building stuff all the time, and how do you scale this stuff? And that's part of it, right? Because if you have to run your own resolver and it's that complex, a guy like me is, could I figure it out? Sure. But what's the incentive to really do that? I understand for a bigger organization. So how does something like this scale? How do you take it to the next level? Make it easier. I mean, imagine we're going to build this product and I'm like, hey guys, we got to find a better way to run these resolvers. How would we put that project together?
I think it's, in the best scenario, there's a library or a set of resolvers to pick from. So trusted actors in the space are running resolvers, whether it's a Google, a Coinbase, and Infura, ENS. They're all running their own resolvers, and you can kind of pick which one you want to use.
But so then, are they incentivized right now? Because back to the token, is the token are they earning this token to run these resolvers?
No, not at all. And it's worth noting that these resolvers are just contracts on chain. So there's not an operational overhead to them.
There's not an operational overhead, but there is an incentive. I mean, you want to incentivize somebody, these trusted networks, but you don't want to have just one or two. I mean, what if these trusted resolvers turn out to be untrusted, or they get hijacked somehow? I mean, it seems like this could be an issue, not today because there's not enough built on top of it. But imagine if it was like DNS, if it had that kind of a scale. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot could go wrong, right?
The flips, yes and no, because the flip side is this is still an Ethereum contract. So it's decentralized. The code is open source. Everybody can read it. They have upgradability. So if there is a bug in the contract, they have a way to replace it. So the intention is that the more that it's used, the more secure and more validated it's going to be, and the safer it'll be.
All right, I'm going to trust you guys. Okay, well, so what else can you do other than just basically pick an English word or whatever word actually and attach it to a .eth? Do you guys see any other projects that are building on top that are being creative with this technology?
I think go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of it has to do with Web3 identity. So there's a lot of projects building like different identity profile, social network type projects, all using ENS at its core. A couple of buddies of mine are doing a Web3 link tree, if you will. So like, here's my Web3 profile. I can save like contacts to a list of other ENS profiles that I've met or have connected with in some fashion. So it kind of gives you this more human approachable way to experience Web3. And so I think it's less about building products on top of ENS and more just about incorporating ENS into all the products that already exist.
Yeah.
Okay. So
just to make it simpler.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's about making it just simpler and making it more digestible.
So John, if you have John's cookies.eth, right? That's
right.
A business that's good. You don't care if that's public.
Yep.
But what about just, John S.eth? You have all these private transactions. So in the future, like I have not linked any of my ENS names to actually maybe one, but not to an address that I use daily, because I really don't want people to know what I'm spending, what I even have, right? I don't want them to see inside my wallet. So do you see that as an issue, or do you have?
They'll figure it out if once they see a transaction. The purpose of it is just to make it more human friendly. At the end of the day, if your address is public and it's on an immutable ledger, if someone wanted to figure it out, they can backtrack and figure it out eventually.
Yeah, like I have all of my wallets are named that I use day to day. Yeah.
And it just makes it easier to like manage that, Just I know the names of the accounts, and then I just think of it almost like my bank account. I know this account goes to this and this goes to this.
See, I don't know. I have an issue with that. I think that if somebody does want to find you, I get that. Like somebody really, it's out there. I get that. But you make it a little bit harder than if you just make it like your Twitter name and you're like I invested in SpankChain and I had a bunch of tokens, and that's the last thing I want the world to see. So there's things like that you just want to kind of not obfuscate, but you don't want to publicize. And so, that'll be interesting because you don't go to like only maybe Brock, you're probably the only guy in the world that goes to an actual, like 145.697. You go to most people go to the TMS and not many people do that. So I guess that's what'll happen, but I don't know, with money, you're adding a different component to this. So,
well, and that's, so Stephen, to your point though, even in like the software world right now with DNS, if I am running a development server that I don't want the world to know about, I don't put it behind a DNS record, and I do visit the IP address directly. So it's still like publicly accessible, but no one's going to know about it. So in a very similar sense, in the Web3 world, you can have these like one-off wallet addresses that you go invest in Spaint Chain or do whatever else you want to do.
Tornado
and
Cash.
They don't have to tie back, right? They don't have to tie back to your like main ENS name. You just kind of have like a wallet address for each use case.
Very sneaky, Brock.
But the minute those two accounts cross over, then,
It's funny because when I first got into the space, I started learning a lot about it, and I was thinking, a lot of people all over the news, especially this time, it was like, Silk Road, Bitcoin Anonymous, and I just remember Russ was my we were building or Rex at the time, and I said to Russ, Russ, this looks like it's making things more trackable, not less trackable. He's like, oh yeah, it definitely is. He's like, I don't know why everyone's saying. So it seems like we're going into a world that's going to be pretty transparent.
100%.
Yep. Which is hopefully good in some capacity.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, good and bad.
We would hope.
I guess it's good for data. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, it's going to be. I mean, all the data that's out there right now is just like we haven't even scraped the surface, and what you can get. What I mean, it's amazing. It's really cool. So, all right. Well, John, so what else do you have to say on this topic of ENS? Any projects you're following? Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
So I'm excited to see I'm more excited and more interested in seeing what the DAO does over the technology, because the idea is relatively simple, but how to kind of expand it. And will the DAO die and it just becomes legacy, quote unquote legacy? Or do people take that same concept and kind of build on top of it, almost like they took the idea of decentralization with Ethereum and built out ENS, but someone else says, ENS is too old school for us, and they build something else on top of it. So that would be cool to see.
I like that. Brachiosaurus?
Yeah, I just want to say get used more. It was interesting, like the last 6 months, there was a huge boom in ENS registrations because it was like this whole NFT craze. It was really weird. But like none of them are actually like using it to do anything. They're just buying them as NFTs. So I'd love to see like the utility increase. And to your point earlier, John, I don't know how this works on L2s. Like, I don't know if you can deploy a resolver to an L2. I don't know enough about it. Like if your ENS names are transferable between layers or not. So that'd be an interesting thing to figure out.
There's an L2 gateway. So there's a server that speaks to a common protocol to answer questions about data stored on a layer 2 platform. This is combined with smart contract on Ethereum with a 3-step process, which I won't go into right now. But
that's interesting.
I was curious about this. This has some centralization around it as well, but we don't have to go into those details because I don't fully understand it, and I read a couple of different resources. And it's to follow some of these trees and graphs, I'd have to spend some more time on, but that might be worth, kind of just doing a deep dive, and maybe people won't be interested in that as much as we are, but I definitely would like to understand this better.
That'd be super cool.
Yeah.
Just some quick stats. So there's been, the most expensive ENS I guess domain, whatever you want to call it, it was sold for $50,000 like 13 days ago. So it's 115.eth. That's it's a lot of money for, I guess the 3 letters, but there's been over 2 million sold. And let's see, I saw the number for how many have been sold total. I think it's, so there's been 2,192 ENS names sold. Actually, you know what? And I think it's 200 over a billion. I don't have the exact numbers, but I was reading some of the stats, and it's pretty staggering. I know a lot of people are just buying these to speculate, but
isn't that like a huge component though? It's what's it called? Domain flipping. Like they kind of already exists with like DNS services like GoDaddy. People go buy up GoDaddy and then try to resell those domains. So you're buying it speculating that it would go up in value because you see a trend or something. So I'd say that's no different.
The other thing they did is they opened up so like Google.com can now come into the ecosystem, or if you have a .org, or they brought in about 1,300 top level domains so far. So I haven't really played around with that either, but that's it's pretty cool.
Interesting.
That is cool. I'm curious how, like, what that relationship looks like.
Yeah. How do you that's a question that we've come across, and actually anybody that's trying to get data from the real world into this world, how do you bridge those two ecosystems? It's not a trivial thing to do.
No, it is not. That's for sure.
We'll wrap it there, and we'll figure out what we're going to talk about next week. We've got a lot of things we're working on and a lot of neat things that I got ideas about. I know you guys have ideas about. So with that said, we will see you all next week. If you have any questions, comments, any of that jazz, so missing links, hello@missinglinks.fm.